let's introduce our guest. Of course, we've been saying it's Adrienne Wilkinson, and if you don't, and you know, she's in Nobility, but if you don't know her as, you know, from that, she's in Xena Warrior Princess, where she plays the daughter of Xena, or Lucy Lawless in the show. She's also in the upcoming Star Trek Renegades. She's also in The Force Unleashed, where she's Maris Brood. That's in Force Unleashed 1 and 2. She's also in The Old Republic. She's done lots of voice acting, lots of TV work, and movie work. You'll see her in lots of things. And, of course, as we said, she's in Nobility and Star Trek Renegades coming up really soon. So let's switch this over now. Thank you, Zach, for joining me for this first half of the show as we switch to our interview with Adrienne Wilkinson.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So a lot of people, you know, at least my generation, met you first with Xena Warrior Princess, where you said you were Eve, the daughter of Xena. And, of course, since then you've gone into a career of television shows, movies, voice acting with video games, and so on. When you first started with Xena, did you ever think your career would go in the direction that it has?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, when you're first starting, you certainly have big ideas and big goals and aspirations, but you're also just eager to work. And my number one priority has always been working on interesting projects with great people. You know, filmmaking of any sort, or just the entertainment medium in general, is so collaborative, and your experience is made or broken by the people that you work with. And I've been incredibly lucky to work with wonderful people. So I don't know that I would have expected my career to necessarily be as genre-oriented as it has become. But I'm thrilled with the way that it has played out, because I've had an amazing time.
And I imagine knowing that your family is also involved in, you know, entertainment. You know, I believe your sister is a musician, and then you have the other sister who's a producer and so on. What's it like being in a family of entertainers? Do you guys get together and share stories about your careers or projects, or what's it like being in a family that's built that way?
Oh, that's interesting. You know, I take a little bit of pride in the fact that I think I sort of opened that door. I'm the oldest of four siblings, and there had not been any sort of entertainment, certainly not professionally, an entertainment focus before I made the leap. And I love the fact that both of my sisters were brave enough to also pursue their passions. And it's, you know, it's a funny journey. It's like everyone else when you get together and you tell stories about work. You know, ours may clearly have more of an entertainment focus, but it's just as full of triumph and heartbreak as anything else. So it's always interesting. But I think that the great part about it is that we understand at least a little bit the journey that each other is going through. So it's nice to have someone sort of in your corner understanding.
And a few years ago, didn't all of you, or at least three of you, get to be in a short film together? I believe it's called Expectation, like all of you at the same time?
That's exactly right. My sister Tracy wrote and directed it. My sister Amy did all of the music, and I was the lead actor.
So what was it like working on a film together as family? Was it easier in a way that, you know, you were already familiar and, you know, working with everyone, or was it harder because as siblings you guys rub each other in ways that you don't necessarily rub each other professionally, if that makes sense?
You know, I didn't know what to expect, and I have to admit I was a little bit nervous, mainly because as the oldest I'm sort of used to leading, and I wasn't sure how the dynamic would work between my sister Tracy and I with her directing. And, you know, my fears were completely unwarranted. It was absolutely seamless. The great thing about siblings is you often see things the same way, and that definitely happened with us in terms of how we saw the material, how we interpreted it. You know, we sort of had an innate shorthand between us. So it was thrilling. I really loved it, and I would jump at the chance to work together again.
Awesome. I know lots of people when they work with siblings, sometimes it can be stressful in some ways because, you know, your siblings know you better than everyone else, and it doesn't always work professionally.
Oh, exactly. They know what buttons to push, and I think you just have to be, I think the communication is the key. You have to make sure that you're on the same page and that you're not just assuming you're on the same page.
So we're going to switch directions just a little bit because, a lot of our listeners are really into, well, we'll say geek television, and that's where you got your big break right at the very beginning, because you were in Saved by the Bell and some smaller things, as I recall. But Xena Warrior Princess is definitely where you made the jump from, I guess, being not an extra, but being a television actress walk on or whatever, and to actually being a starring role. How did you get your role in Xena Warrior Princess, and what was your first reaction when you were cast as Eve, the daughter of Lucy Lawless?
It was the normal audition process to book the role, and the story goes that I actually turned down the audition several times, not because I wasn't interested, but because my schedule wouldn't allow it. But they kept looking; they weren't finding what they wanted, and eventually I got to come in and read for the role, and obviously I eventually booked it. But the interesting part about it is they were very top secret about the fact that it was Xena's daughter. So I had no idea that that's the role that I was going out for. I was only told that it was to play the Empress of Rome, and that it was also to be a nemesis of the character Xena. And the truth is, I thought that I didn't really have much of a chance, purely because Lucy Lawless and I have somewhat of a similar look. And when they're casting a nemesis, they almost always cast opposites. So they would cast a blonde or a different ethnicity or something. So it was really interesting to realize that the fear I had was actually what was working in my favor. And it wasn't until I had booked the job and they sent me the scripts and I read the scripts that I was then able to learn all of the details and realize I was playing the daughter, which was definitely a bit intimidating, but also really great.
Were you a fan of the show, probably starting with Hercules, by the time when you auditioned, or did you become a fan when you joined the show?
I became a fan. It was really all new to me. I was certainly aware of it culturally. I mean, at the time, Xena Warrior Princess was the biggest show in the world. So, it played in almost 300 countries and multiple languages, and it was definitely a pop culture phenom, but it wasn't a show that I had actually really watched. But I have to say, to this day, it remains one of the best sets I've ever been on. I mean, Lucy Lawless and Renee O'Connor were just extraordinary in terms of their leadership on set. Filming in New Zealand is unparalleled in terms of the adventure and how beautiful it is every single day. And it just, the entire adventure itself was just really magical. So it's hard for almost anything to compare. It was a really intense and incredible way to start.
I have to agree about the New Zealand thing. My family's all from New Zealand, so we're a little biased. But yeah, New Zealand is fantastic.
It is. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's so, New Zealand has this thing that I don't think is captured anywhere else, where it's such a progressive people, at least in my experience, really open, very educated, and et cetera and so forth. But also you have this incredible small town feel, even when you're in the middle of Auckland, the biggest city. I mean, it's this really beautiful balance that they have that made it just an extraordinary experience.
Indeed. Yeah, it feels comfortable no matter where you are. You don't feel, I don't feel stressed there.
Exactly.
Nothing like LA.
Completely.
So, post Xena Warrior Princess, a lot of people would expect that, from there you could pretty much get whatever role you wanted, at least in television. Was this true for you, or how did things progress for you professionally as soon as you were done with your 10 episodes or so of that show?
Well, what's interesting, my role on the show ended basically when the series ended. And what was really kind of interesting is, although it was the biggest show in the world, it was also sort of looked down upon. It was considered a guilty pleasure. It was considered somewhat cheesy. So even though you had all of this incredible fan interaction around you, and even though the stories themselves were these epic stories that were intense and took amazing talent to pull off, at the same time, the casting community always kind of held back a little bit. And what's funny is it's not the case anymore. People have a real fondness, but it took probably 5 years before I would be in a casting office and they would admit to watching the show or admit to being a fan and of the show in particular. And, I just found that really interesting where I think it sort of happened with all of us. The show was such a phenomenon, but in a very particular way, that it was both a blessing and a little bit of a curse for a little while, where I think that sort of worked itself out. I think now people have a real respect for it because it was such groundbreaking television. I mean, it was the first show where you had a female protagonist that was also sort of an anti-hero, and, she was this action star, but her morality was sort of blurred because she was constantly looking for redemption, but also, it was also through violence. It was all of this stuff that had never been viewed on television, or at least not from a woman. So I really think it was groundbreaking television that they certainly credit it now, although they may not have immediately at the beginning. But, any show now, whether it's Orange is the New Black, or at the time, whether it was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, all of that stuff, I think, found a place because the show Xena sort of broke open the way that females could be perceived on television successfully. So I have absolute respect for it. And I think the respect for the show has grown over time.
I think even Lucy Lawless had a while before she got back in headlines. Wasn't it not till like Spartacus where she got back really into starring roles?
I would say that's probably accurate. I mean, Lucy works all of the time and has always worked all of the time. But certainly, I think she too suffered probably more than any of us from not being able to shake loose that imagery. No matter what for the rest of her life, she will always be Xena Warrior Princess first and foremost. No matter how successful her other projects, that is, that's a crown that she will wear, but it's also, a bit of a weight that she will carry.
She'll always have to do that yell at cons.
There you go.
So a few years after you finished with Xena, you moved into voice acting as well. What drew you to voice acting? Was it they offered it to you, or did you get drawn to it?
It was kind of both. I had always been interested in it, but I had always heard it's an incredibly difficult community to break into. And that's true. But I at the time I decided to go into it is also the time when I met some agents that were interested in working with me. And although I hadn't done voice work per se, I had done so much looping, which is incredibly similar. Because particularly with Xena, we had to redub almost all of our dialogue because nearly anything you shoot outdoors, the sound quality just isn't as perfect as it needs to be for the final presentation. So I had gotten really used to working in voiceover booths and recording studios. And so it was just a really easy transition for me. And luckily, one of my first jobs, the producer / director and I just got along famously, and we ended up working together. We've probably done, 8 or 10 projects together at this point. So it was just, it is about breaking into the community and sort of establishing your connections there. And I was just lucky that I've again been able to work with some really great people.
And I know one game you worked on which really broke you into the geek community further, because Star Wars tends to do that. But, was this little game that I'm quite sure no one ever heard of called Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. How did they find you for Maris Buda? How did the audition process of that one go? Because I know with this one, because we've talked to Sam Witwer and Natalie Cox and David Collins and lots of others who were on this game, who talk about it was secretive at the same time, also too big to keep secret, and how the auditions and the recording and so on was so different at the time. What was it like being called in for The Force Unleashed and then realizing you're working with Star Wars?
Well, overwhelming and amazing and fantastic and every other kind of great adjective that you can come up with. I mean, that's one of my best working experiences as well. I had such a great time. The audition was interesting because they were secretive about the type of project, but it was a unique audition because even though it was for a voiceover at the time, they wanted us to audition in person. And of course, that's because the 5 main characters were also motion capture. And what they do a lot of times is they find characters they like and then sort of, or find people they like, actors they like, and then sort of blend the characters to them. But in this case, they had character art that they were already in love with and had been working with for years. So they were looking for actors that looked like the art they already had established. And luckily, Sam and I looked exactly like the art that they had. I mean, my character, Maris Brood, had some crazy makeup on, but my facial structure, my coloring, everything. I mean, Sam was, you would have thought someone was drawing him specifically. But for both of us, I think we really got lucky because not only did we have the chops they were looking for to create the characters, but we just walked in the door and had luck on our side. I mean, it was about 6 months from the time I auditioned until the time I officially got the job. But I was told later that they actually decided on me that day because they were happy with, which, you know, it's kind of infuriating to make you wait for 6 months. But I was told that, you know, that day they were happy with the performance and they were overjoyed that that in person I looked as much like the art as the headshot that they had of me did. So they were happy from that moment on. And I'm sure it was the same with Sam and probably the same with Natalie as well.
So with Maris Brood, you got to do the mocap suits and so on as well?
It was a combination. We did mocap, but the way that they did it, the mocap was our shoulders and up. So we didn't do suits. They actually divided the technology. So all of our faces and our shoulders were motion capture, but the bodies were actually still animated. But they used about 5 different technologies to create it. I mean, they filmed us. When we did the voiceover, we actually did it as scenes, so with the other actors in the room. And all of that was done with mocap. But it was also being filmed so that the animators could use our bodies and our postures and the mannerisms that we were using. They also did this thing called clone camming, and they did another thing called, I want to say it was called landscaping or something like that. But anyway, at the end, there were 5 or 6 different technologies that they married all together to create the final project.
For a game like that, how long did it take for your role to be done? You know, them filming you and working with you. How long was that process?
Well, if I remember correctly, this is going to sound crazy, but I feel like if I remember correctly, that game took 8 years to make. My involvement, oh gosh, I would say I was doing voice work. The main work that we did was over the course of about 2 or 3 weeks, all at once. But we did continuing extra voice sessions and things like that for probably at least a year, maybe a year and a half afterwards. So maybe my involvement was about 2 years, but the actual creating of the character, that took many more years.
And then the second one, I know you're in the Wii version because there's the multiplayer and so on. Did they actually bring you back in to record those, or did they just reuse lines that you had already done before?
I came in again because not only did I do new Maris lines, but I actually did a whole handful of ancillary characters. So I don't know if I was even credited for those, but I mean, you'll hear me as just tiny characters throughout the game. So probably, I think I did 6 or 7 additional characters that you would hear depending on which storyline you were in, which choices you were making, plus, of course, the Maris for the Wii.
So I guess one question I guess our fans would really want to know, were you a fan of Star Wars before this?
I was, but I feel terrible saying that because it's not the same as Sam. Sam.
I don't think anyone is the same as Sam. Sam is on a different level from everyone.
Yeah, like it's phenomenal. So I don't feel like a fan at all if I'm in the room with him because he knows things that it's just crazy. For me, I would say, I knew it the way that most people know it, where, or I should say not a super fan, but certainly aware. It was part of my childhood, but yeah, not the same league.
Yeah, we've learned from the rest of the cast that pretty much Sam knows more than everyone else. So he's just there to teach you things. Let's consider him the master, and then
Yes.
you'll learn from there.
That's totally appropriate.
So was the association with the Force Unleashed what brought Bioware to bring you in for the Old Republic as well? Or, as we've learned from some people, that pretty much with the Old Republic, they called everyone who can do voices in and said, we need everyone?
Well, it was specifically the same voice team. It was the same voice director that did both of those games. But I actually recorded all of my stuff for the Old Republic. If I remember correctly, it was even before The Force Unleashed ever came out. So it was really, that again was a long process because that was such a monster of a project. But yeah, if I remember correctly, in the timeline, I had done multiple Star Wars projects before any of them had even come out. And a lot of that is because it was the same team that wanted me to come back in.
Because at the same time, you'd be doing Star Wars: The Clone Wars, which I know they record like 2 years before the episode comes out.
Right.
And you were in a very secretive, special episode with Sam.
Yes.
And so did you record that one before you did The Force Unleashed, so where it's like a reunion with Sam, or is that before Force Unleashed?
That was a reunion. We did that after it had come out, I think even after the sequel had come out. But again, that was so secretive that neither of us knew that the other one was doing it until we both got there and realized we were playing brother and sister and dark side and light side. And, just having, I just love that. I love that it's so secretive that they don't tell us anything or give us a script or anything until we actually show up in the studio.
So, that, of course, is the Mortis arc, which is probably the most unique arc in all of the Clone Wars, the show which I love, and I know lots of listeners just love. Was that an arc that even, I imagine you had questions, I know the rest of the cast had questions, is that an arc that even Sam had questions for and Dave Filoni was actually able to answer stuff that Sam did not know?
I'm not going to be able to remember the specific details, but I can tell you that we were in the voice session, and the way that the Clone Wars works, they have the entire cast in the same room. So there's probably 8 of us in the same room, and Dave Filoni is giving us some direction for a specific thing, and Sam sort of raises his hand and points out that this entire section of the script doesn't make sense because of A, B, and C in the logic of the trilogy, and, is able to sort of completely unravel the entire thing. So they had to change lines to make it make sense to fit Sam's knowledge that was greater than everyone else's in the room. While
the rest of you are like, just please let us do our lines, because...
Well, sir, what I love about it, Sam and I have very similar personality types, and we're both kind of perfectionists, and we both love for things to be as good as they can be and to be collaborative. So I love it. I love that he ups the ante, but I will say, it just made me laugh because, these are scripts that have been worked on by the most amazing writers and certainly people with all of this knowledge. And the fact that there we are in the room and Sam is still pointing out things that he has knowledge of that no one else does. I just thought it was hilarious.
And then, from Star Wars, you jump to, lots of other sci-fi series like Star Trek Renegades, which you mentioned at the very beginning. I know you're in, I believe, Nobility, which is another more comedy sci-fi series.
Right.
So I guess we're probably going to begin wrapping up because, of course, we're near the end of time. But do you really like working on we'll say the Comic-Con type shows like the Star Trek Renegades and Nobility and the Clone Wars and so on? Do you like being in roles where you can go to cons, you can go to places, and all these fans are going to come up to you and either, I don't know, berate you for messing up something that they memorized 6,000 years ago, or, just kind of worship at your feet for being part of the universe that they're in?
I never have, and I certainly never would make a decision on work based on whether or not I thought it had convention appeal. To me, it's a combination of the opportunities that come to you, but also just of the characters and whether or not you respond to them. And, one thing I can say is that I'm sort of known for playing strong women and independent women and powerful female archetypes. And for better or worse, the main place that you can find those in our society in terms of media is within science fiction. And I don't know if it's because so much of it takes place in the future. So, naturally it seems logical that there would be more female leadership or, some et cetera and so forth. But, I love playing these incredibly dynamic, interesting women that are powerful and leaders. And I would jump at the chance to play that on a contemporary show, but I certainly would lean towards playing that type of character in sci-fi for the rest of my life, as opposed to playing, just a boring housewife that doesn't really get the writing that she deserves in some other type of project. So, to me, it's always about the material that's coming to you. So I would jump at the chance to work at something contemporary. I would absolutely adore that. But I would want to make sure that it's a character that I found interesting and appealing and just really intriguing. So, knock on wood, hopefully that continues in whatever genre.
So that's what attracted you to Star Trek Renegades, where you play a descendant of a very famous Star Trek character.
Well, I just love that. I mean, it's multiple reasons within Renegades. I mean, I play the captain of what is essentially a Black Ops team. So, the title Renegades refers to the fact that, we are a renegade crew. We are made up of criminals and rogues and, all of these people that have these incredible skills but have a really sketchy history. And we've been called upon because they can't call on the regular people to be able to do these particular missions that have to be done, but that also have to be unacknowledged. So it's really the dark side of Star Trek. And Captain Lexa Singh is this incredibly interesting, sexy, powerful character who has this incredibly rich history. But what I also loved about it is that, she's one of the youngest captains you've ever seen. She's the second female captain, but she's the first captain that you've ever seen that is sort of, she's a bit punk rock, for lack of a better term. And she doesn't mind breaking rules as long as, she's getting her job done. And there's something that's really interesting about that, because we don't break away from the Star Trek canon, nor do we break away from the way that they tell stories in terms of the moral compass, but we tell them from a different perspective, which I think is something the fans will love. I think it's really interesting. So I hope they'll check it out. It should come out late this spring, I believe.
Yeah, and it has Walter Koenig returning as Chekhov, and Grant Imahara's in it, and lots of other great actors.
Oh, it's great. It's about half Star Trek veterans and about half brand new people. So it includes Edward Furlong and Tim Russ and Sean Young, Robert Picardo, just all kinds of great people.
Awesome. And I think that means we're just about out of time. So we're going to do the last question we ask everyone. We're going to give you the soapbox to promote any upcoming projects that you still haven't promoted, or convention appearances, upcoming TV shows, charity events, anything you'd like to promote or say to the fans, you can say to the fans now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. And a huge thank you to the fans. I'm always astounded and amazed that anyone cares at all about what I'm doing in my career. And I'm incredibly grateful and so profoundly amazed every time. So thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And there's all kinds of stuff coming up. On January 5th, a web series that I'm part of called Pretty comes out. It's a comedy series. You can find that on prettytheseries.com. And I'm incredibly excited. It's a role unlike any that I've ever played. The series takes place in the world of beauty pageants. So toddler beauty pageants for that matter. So I'll just leave that there. I also have a fun guest star appearance coming up on About a Boy, which I believe will come out in February. And the main thing I want to say is just I hope everyone will tune in to Star Trek Renegades. It will be available online for everyone. We hope that this is the beginning of a brand new Star Trek series. And, of course, half of that depends on the fan response. So I hope that everyone will check it out. So thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Just before you go, can I record a real quick bumper just so I can help advertise the show? So just something along the lines of, this is Adrienne Wilkinson from Xena, Eve from Xena Warrior Princess, Maris Brood from The Force Unleashed, and you're listening to Bombad Radio.
Bombad is how I say it?
Yep. Bombad Radio, yep.
Okay. Hi, this is Adrienne Wilkinson. You know me as Eve from Xena Warrior Princess and Maris Brood from Star Wars The Force Unleashed, and you're listening to Bombad Radio.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.